Okay, today I'm visiting with Mae Forsyth here at Ulen, and we're going to be talking about her book. And what is the title of your book?
From Horse and Buggy to the Moon.
And you started writing that approximately what year or how long ago?
Actually, writing I didn't start until about 3 years ago, but I started collecting the calendars because I put everything on calendars. So I started collecting the calendars, heavens, about 50-some years ago, put them in a big black plastic bag, and I hung on to them because I kept thinking, someday I'm going to do this. But I really didn't get around to starting until like about 3 years ago. And I thought more.
A lot of us have plans of doing these kind of things, but never get at it.
I know.
But you did.
Well, I decided I was 85, getting to be 85, and I thought, if I'm going to do this, I better do it while I still have my marbles.
Well, you have really a good memory because I've been looking through this book. I've read quite a few items you've written in here, but not much. I'd say maybe about 10%, and that's about it. Okay. So let's talk about the book. And we'll just start at the beginning and kind of work our way through and see what we do in this taping. This is just totally unrehearsed.
Okay. Well, actually, like I said, I decided Horse and Buggy to the Moon because I remember riding a horse, being in a buggy with horses and buggies. I remember it real well. I was probably 3-4 years old, but I do remember it. And so I got to thinking about, this is the long lifespan that I've had. And a lot has happened in that time. Just lots and lots of things have happened. In fact, then I got to thinking, and on the second page, I got to thinking that, shoot, it's more than Horse and Buggy to the Moon. It's Horse and Buggy to the Moon and then some.
And computer
that's a long
age,
time ago.
We've gotten into all kinds of things, even since the moon.
That's right. So, but, my biggest regret was that I didn't ask questions of my ancestors and my siblings. That really bothered me because when I came right down to writing it, gosh, I'd come across something and I'd think, well, we moved from this place to that place. How did we get there? And then nobody to ask. And so
it's that way with me too. My dad died about 10 years ago or more than that. And a lot of questions I have now, and I don't know who I could even ask because I don't even have an aunt left.
I know it. Your dad was over 100 years old.
101, yes.
Yeah, 101 when he died. Yeah. But I never knew my grandparents. My one grandfather lived until I was 7 years old.
I see.
But 7 months. But I was kind of the tail end of the family. There was only one more after. We had 8 siblings, and I was the next to the last one. So I wasn't in on that, speaking Norwegian and Swedish and so forth like the older kids were. And I always regretted that, too. That would have been fun to learn that.
They didn't speak any Norwegian much. Your father and mother, I'm sure, did.
Only when they didn't want us to know what they were saying.
That's pretty typical. My wife, that was kind of the situation. Well, my wife, Karen, she didn't learn Norwegian, and I'm sure that her folks did the same thing.
Sure. I think they all did.
Yeah, but my sisters and myself, we did learn Norwegian. We spoke that around home.
I know a few words, but not much. I can understand it a little bit if they speak slowly. I can understand a little bit of it, but never learned, and I was sorry about that. But the main thing was people that would decide to do something like this, ask questions before it's too late.
Right.
Start right now asking questions. Even if you use a tape or anything, just be sure to start asking questions.
Right.
The reason for the cover is a picture of a family with a pair of horses and a buggy, because my nephew, Randy Freed, who is my brother Leonard's son, is the manager of DL Printing. And so when he came to printing the book, he wanted to know if I didn't have a picture of our family with a buggy so that it would go with the book. And I didn't have one. So he said, well, what's wrong with the picture that you did of the Dahl family in Ulen? And so I thought, well, yeah, I did that pencil picture.
Hold up the cover. Okay, I want to zoom in on it a little bit and just continue
and the original is up there on the wall.
Right, I saw that up on your wall in your living room here.
Okay, so I decided, okay, I'll go ahead and I'll use that. And so that way, at least, even if it wasn't my family, it was a picture that I did. And so that's the way that came about. And then I dedicated it to my mother.
Okay, very good.
And that was the way it started. And so I decided, you know, a lot happened in my lifetime. And it was like it was a bunch of chapters.
Mm-hmm.
It was in sections, approximately 20 years in every section. And so the way it turned out, it seemed like it was approximately 20 anyway. And so I decided I'd put it into different volumes and break it up. And so I did. I broke it up into 5 volumes. And each one, the first volume is The Family Before Me, a little bit about my ancestors and my grandmother coming over on the ship from Norway and so forth. And then the second volume is from the time I was born until I was married.
Sure.
And then volume 3 was marriage and our Navy life. We spent 21 years in the Navy because Don was a United States Navy bandmaster. So we spent 21 years in the Navy. And then after the volume 4 was the years following the Navy. And then volume 5 was the last one, which was the most difficult to write because of the things that happened in volume 5. So I entitled that volume of Tears, because actually when I finished that last volume, I counted, and there were 40 deaths in Don's and my families in that at the time, including Don and 3 boys, all 3 of our boys.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a hard one. And then there were a lot of friends that passed away too, but relatives alone,
Yes.
there was over 40 deaths in that volume. So it was a hard one to write, very hard one to write.
Your mother died in 75, was it?
Yes.
And
How do you remember that?
Your father was what? That was way
My
back.
dad drowned back in 49.
Is that right?
Yeah, in 1949 he drowned down at Dakota Beach in Detroit Lakes, trying
Is
to
that
save a
right?
mother and a daughter. Yeah,
To do what?
to save a mother, a family, a mother and a
Oh,
daughter
no.
were out drowning.
Is that right?
And so he was trying to save them,
I didn't read that.
and
but
they pulled him in.
I see.
Yeah.
Huh.
It was down at Dakota Beach, and there were a lot of drop-offs there. And so the sad thing of it was, they were not relatives, but neighbors of my mom and dad.
Uh-huh.
And they were kind of poorly, and so poorly as far as money is
Yes,
concerned.
right.
And so he decided, and they decided, to take the mother and her 2 children with them for a week's vacation down at Detroit Lakes, Dakota Beach.
I see.
And they barely got there, and the kids were so anxious to get into the water. And so the little boy was playing along the shore, but the girl and the mother were going to go out further and without realizing the drop-offs.
I see.
And the mother and the daughter were drowning. My dad went out there with all his clothes, shoes, and everything on, and tried to save them. And he did pull the mother up onto the land,
Sure.
but he couldn't get the daughter, and she pulled him in. And he went down, and she landed on top of him.
I see.
And they didn't find his body for about a half an hour. They got her in shortly, and then worked on her. But she did have a heartbeat at one time, but
I see.
she passed away.
Sure.
But anyway, my dad drowned.
Mm-hmm.
That was
You had 3 sisters and 4 brothers.
Yes.
Name
yeah.
them just.
Okay. Yeah, there were 8 of us all together. Mabel was the oldest.
Sure.
And she was a very artistic person. And then Bill was next, and I'm sure everybody in all of North Dakota knows who Bill Freed is, because he saved the farmers. He lived in Horace. He lived in Horace.
I see.
Saved the farmers all kinds of money. Anytime I'm introduced to somebody and they find out my maiden name, they'll say, were you related to Bill Freed? Everybody knows Bill Freed. If you got something that you can't fix, call Bill Freed. He can do it.
Oh, and what was his occupation? He was.
Oh, blacksmith.
He was a blacksmith.
Oh, yes, and he could make anything. He was a genius in metal, absolute genius. Just, in fact, the old saying was, if you tell Bill it can't be fixed, he'll fix it one way or the other. He invented a lot of things, a lot of machinery, farm machinery, but he never got credit for it.
Sure.
But then shortly afterwards, there's some John Deere or somebody who's got it.
Name the rest of your brothers and sisters,
Okay.
and we'll get to
And
them a
then
little later as
Next is
well.
Lil, and she married Clarence Abraham. They lived in Fargo.
I see.
And then was Laverne, and he's the one that took over the milk route after we
Frenchie.
quit the milk route. Frenchie, they called him
Right.
Frenchie, and he took over the milk route.
And he was married to a Larson.
Yes, and he was married to Myrtle Larson.
That makes you related to Ron and Ruth Larson.
That's right, that's right. That's as close as I can get to a relative in Ulen. I have no relatives in Ulen anymore.
I see, okay.
They're as close as I can get. And then next after him was Clarence Kelly. Everybody called him Kelly. And he was a genius also in metal. And he owned a plumbing business out in Cutbank, Montana. He married Olga Matson from Hitterdal. And then after that, let's see, Clarence, and then it was Leonard. And he was a genius in carpentry. Fantastic. He worked for NDSU for many years. He built all the cabinets and everything all over.
Sure.
And then he married a girl from, actually she was from Monoman for a while. And then, let's see, and then I guess I'm next, and I married Don Forsyth.
Sure.
And then my last sister was Bernice.
Sure.
And she married a fellow from Minneapolis.
I see.
So she was my...
Well, Mabel had a sister who was very artistic, too. You.
No, I couldn't compare with her.
Oh, well, you've done some pretty nice work.
I
Right.
I did love it, but I've had to quit, several years ago on account of Parkinson's. Too shaky. But I did love it all my
Sure,
life. I
sure.
liked artwork, portraits, and everything. So.
Okay.
Okay. As far as my grandparents are concerned, both of my grandfathers came from Sweden, and my grandmothers came from Norway. And the one grandfather, my mother's dad, came from Sweden, and he landed in New York or someplace on the East Coast, he and his cousin. And they started heading for Minnesota for some reason. I didn't hear that. I don't remember what that was. But they verbally walked almost all the way when they could catch a ride. Otherwise, they just walked and took their time and walked. And he left Norway with a $20 gold piece in his pocket.
My.
And when they got to Evansville is where they settled in Evansville,
Yes,
which
near
is about 20
Alexandria.
miles north of Alexandria.
Right.
And when they got there, he still had the $20 gold piece. Nobody could cash it. So evidently he must have run into some nice people that fed him or something, because, or maybe they worked for the
But he
meal.
came all the way from Norway with that.
Yes, $20 gold piece and never got to cash it. Yeah. And then, like I said, both the grandfathers came from Sweden. For some reason, they settled right around Evansville.
Sure.
And then both my grandmothers came from Norway. One was from Trondheim, and the other one was from Ugdal in the Numedal Valley.
I see.
And they came over on the ship, and I have pictures of the ship. One of her sisters passed away on the ship.
Oh, was that on the trip over?
Yes, on the trip over. I think it was scarlet fever or something like that. And they landed at Grove Island up in Canada, someplace is where they entered the America. And anyway, she passed away and she was buried there at Grove Island. And then they also went on and came down and ended up in Evansville. So that's how the four met, the two grandmothers and the two grandfathers. And the one grandmother, my mom's mother, married Grandpa Johnson, and her family was not happy at all, because back in those days the Norwegians and the Swedish were feuding, and so they weren't happy at all that she married a Swedish man.
We do a lot of kidding with any Swedes we run into around here. We have nothing against them at all, but we have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah,
but it was more serious back then.
Yeah, oh my, yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, her parents were very unhappy when she married him.
Sure.
But that's about all I can remember about them. I've heard a lot of talk about them, but that's about all I can remember about them.
Now, your folks were in Canada. A lot of your brothers and sisters were born up in Canada, weren't they?
Yes, some of my siblings were. Yes, they homesteaded up in Canada. Oh, gosh. Well, they'd only been married a couple of years when they decided to homestead.
And you were only a year old?
At that time, I wasn't born at all. When they went
you
to
weren't?
Canada.
Oh,
No,
I see, okay.
I wasn't born at all.
Okay.
Mabel, the oldest one, was born, and she was less than a year old.
Yeah, that's who I was thinking of as Mabel.
Yeah.
May and Mabel, those
right.
For a while, when I was reading in the book, I was thinking, Mabel, maybe that's your first name, and May is a nickname, but it's not. I can see that.
No, she was the oldest, and she was less than a year old. So when they went to Canada, she didn't have to be naturalized Canadian because she was less than a year old, so automatically she was Canadian.
Sure.
And then Bill was born there, Lil and Frenchie. Yeah, three of them were born up there. And so they all were Canadian citizens. So when they came back here, then they had to become United States citizens again. I mean, they had to
did.
become United States citizens.
Was there much to that, at that time?
I don't remember just how much it was.
But they were Canadian citizens, sure.
Yeah, they were Canadian citizens.
But your folks were American citizens.
No, they had to be Canadian citizens when they
but-
went up there. So
But they were American citizens first.
yes,
And then they went up there and became Canadian
right.
citizens.
And then they had to come back and become United States citizens again.
Was there dual citizenship?
No, it was one or the other.
Is that
You
right?
had to have one or the other. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, times were tough up there. It was really rough.
Mm-hmm.
It was during the years of the drought, and between the drought and the wind and the prairie fires and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a happy place because it was just rough. They lived
Sure.
in sod houses first.
My
and-
aunt Clara Olson and Pete Olson, they went to
That's
Canada.
right, I remember
And I
that.
wonder if they homesteaded or did something like that. I don't have any idea.
Yeah.
I haven't looked back on
Yeah.
that. But anyway, that's getting off the subject here.
Yeah. So anyway, that's about all I have of the grandparents. And all four of them are buried at Christina Lake Cemetery right near Melby, which is about 5 miles from Evansville. And they're all four buried in that same cemetery there. Yeah.
I've worked down there and around Brandon. That's near Evansville.
Yeah.
Sure.
Uh-huh. My dad used to talk about, there's another little town close to,
Ashby, of course, that's farther west.
there was another one, real close by. He used to-
Garfield. Garfield,
He used to haul grain to grind, to the mill
I see.
to get flour
Sure.
ground from the grain. I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's the
anyway,
area-
that's how my parents met then, see, because they were the four grandfathers and grandmothers, that's where they settled.
Sure.
So they were neighbors. And so that's how my dad met my mom.
Uh-huh.
That's where they started. After they left Canada then, they decided to go back home down to Evansville. I know my mom was terribly lonesome up there. She used to carry the children and walk 5 miles just to see some brush, just some thickets and brush, because she was raised on a lake with woods all around her. And so she was so homesick for that. Anyway, they gave it up and they did come back then. And they sold their, in those days they called real estate people land managers or something
I
like
see.
that, they called them. And so this fellow took over the place and was going to sell it for him. They never heard from him again, so he got nothing out of that
Oh,
homestead in Canada. So then they moved back to Melby, which is just, like I said, a little ways from Evansville. And so my dad and his brother had a blacksmith shop there. My dad he was a jack of all trades, honest to Pete. He half sold our shoes, he cut our hair.
Huh.
He did everything. He was a carpenter, he was just everything.
huh.
There wasn't anything he couldn't do. But so they moved to Melby, and then his siblings, brothers Clarence and Leonard were born there.
I see.
And so then, after they left Melby, then they went up to a small town near Bemidji called Pinewood, Minnesota. And it's pine wood, believe me, it's pine wood. It's nothing but pine trees.
Uh-huh.
So they had to grub and grub to try to get the trees out to be able to do any farming, and it was hopeless. It was just hopeless. And my grandfather lived with him. One last grandfather lived with him. And I was born in Pinewood. Bernice,
You were?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
Bernice and I were born
North
in
of
Pinewood.
Bemidji.
Yeah, it's close to Bemidji. There's a lot of little towns up there. Pinewood,
There's
and
Tinstrike, and there's different towns.
Shovlin
there.
and Solway.
And you've
different-
got Black Duck farther north.
Yeah,
And, Sure.
right, But anyway, then what happened, this was why we ended up in Ulen. My dad and my sister and a brother, Mabel and Bill, heard about there was jobs for potato picking.
Oh, yes.
In those days, that was about in 26, something like that, 1926. And they heard about all these jobs, and it was good money picking potatoes. I
Sure.
suppose it was, what, 2 cents a bushel
I
or something.
suppose.
Anyway, they heard about that. So they came to Ulen, a place called Ulen,
Right.
to do this, to pick potatoes. And they happened to land up at Sherman's. At Sherman's, or, yeah,
At
it was
Lawrence-
George,
Lawrence
well, it was
Sherman's?
actually his dad, George
Sure.
Sherman's place. And, but the dad had been killed by a bull just shortly before
Oh.
that, gored by the bull. So it was Mrs. Sherman and the kids, her own kids, and Lawrence was one of them.
Right.
So they came there and they picked potatoes for them. And Dad was so impressed with the black soil here oh, he couldn't get over this black soil, and they didn't have to grub trees out. So he just, oh man, he got itchy feet. He said, we're going to come back, move to Ulen. So they went back home. When they got back home, they told Mom that we're gonna move to Ulen. So what he ended up doing, he had a beautiful house he built there. It was really a lovely house. And he decided he'd sell the house and he would come here, because while he was here picking potatoes, he saw a thrashing machine, the old-fashioned thrashing machine out west of Ulen.
Sure.
Some farmer owned it. He wanted to sell it. So Dad thought, well, we'll come back here and I will end up working on it by, what do you call it? The steam engine. The steam ran the thrashing machine.
They did.
He decided he'd come back here and he'd buy a steam engine, and then he would go around and thrash and make money that way, like a lot of them did. They had the regular thrashing rigs. So what he ended up doing, he traded that house. No, he sold it. He took the money, came back to Ulen and bought that thrashing machine.
I see.
It never materialized. He ended up going into the dairy business instead.
Oh, I see.
And that thrashing machine was sold for scrap iron in World War II.
Oh, I see.
It sat out there all that time.
Sure.
So, anyway, we came to Ulen.
And you were living south of Ulen at that time?
Not yet, no.
Oh, not yet.
When we came to Ulen, that was something else too. Oh, this was interesting. I was 4 years old. It was 1927, the year that Lindbergh flew over the Atlantic.
Right.
And I remember so well because I'd never been out of Pinewood, you know, since we got there, since I was born. So we came, my mother and three of the old youngest ones, Clarence, Leonard, Bernice, and I, came with Mom on the train. The rest of them, the boys, went with kind of stowaway on the freight train because we didn't have the money for fare. So they stowaway on the freight train with Dad, brought the cattle and so forth on the train, on the freight. So on the way here, can you believe this? We left Pinewood, and we came by train, and we went through Crookston, and we had to stop overnight at Crookston before we could get to Ulen. So we stayed overnight at a hotel. I've never been in a hotel in my life. And so we stayed overnight at this hotel, and then came on. But when we were on the train, because of the money situation, my brother Clarence Kelly was, I think he was about 13 years old. And so when you were 12, over 12, you had to pay a fare, otherwise you rode free. So I remember Kelly sinking down in his seat because Mom told him to make it look like he was
younger,
so because he couldn't afford the fare. So anyway, we made it, but we stayed overnight in Crooks, and then we came on the next day to Ulen. And then Dad and the boys drove the cattle and stuff out to 1 mile west. They rented on Tweeton Corner. There was a little house back in there, Tweeton Corner, 6 miles west.
That's 6 miles, yeah.
6 miles west.
Sure.
There was a little house there.
I see.
Oh gosh, it had a living room and a kitchen and 1 bedroom, I think.
Was that on the north side of the road?
On the north side of the road, right where Biggs' house is now.
Oh, in that area.
Yeah, right in there, right in the woods.
Yeah.
And that house was there until a few years ago when they burned it down. But it was just a little stinking little house. And there were 8 of us kids and the folks. I don't know how on earth, I can't even remember where we slept.
So that's where he had the cattle then?
Not yet.
Oh, not yet?
Not yet,
okay.
no. He only had a few head of cattle with him and some pigs and some turkeys and stuff like that. And they had a heck of a time driving those pigs and turkeys out to that farm 6 miles out. I guess it was almost impossible. But we lived there 1 year. And then we rented a place a mile and a half south, a mile south and a half a mile.
Sure.
Half a mile east. And that's when we started going into the dairy business then. He decided that there was money in that, so that's what we did then. So anyway.
Okay, we'll just continue on. We just stopped for a moment there, and you were talking about your dad's cattle, and then you were moving to another location, and that was a mile and a half or so south of you?
A mile south and a half a mile east.
I see.
No, excuse me. A mile south and a mile and a half. The old Fugli's place.
Oh, I see.
A mile south.
Okay.
Okay. Are you ready?
Continue on, sure.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right, when we moved there then, I don't know where Dad got the idea to do this, but he decided that he would like to raise Guernseys, dairy cows, which, my gosh, your Guernsey milk was a quart of milk was probably a half full of cream.
I see.
You know, you could whip the cream right out of it. And then it was a real smart idea, but at that time it cost $100, and he bought a Guernsey bull from somewhere around the cities. They had to be shipped up here. And that was a lot of money at that time, and we didn't have that kind of money. But anyway, he got that bull, and it was probably the best movie ever made, because we ended up with this Guernsey herd.
Sure.
And we had the dairy in Yulen. There were two other dairies. Stu Dinsmore's had a dairy, and so did Assassin's, but they both had Holsteins. So we used to kid them about their blue milk, because our milk was so rich.
It was not as rich.
Yeah.
How big a herd did your dad have?
We only had about 20-some, and we milked them all by hand, of course. And pretty soon the barn got too small. It was a shack of a barn. And so the barn got too small. So anyway, he built a larger barn. But our milk, absolutely, it was just really, really good milk. And no pasteurizing in those days, of course.
No.
Nothing at all. And so the cream would just sit on the top.
And your brother Frenchie would deliver the milk.
Well, oh gosh, all of us had to work at it.
Oh, you all did?
Oh my gosh, yeah. We all milked the cows, and our girl's job was, of course, to wash the milk bottles and sterilize the bottles and cool the milk and bottle the milk and all that stuff. And my mom worked terribly hard. She just worked awfully hard. But we all had to deliver milk in the morning. Before we'd go to school, we'd come to town with the bottles and boxes and crates.
So you started up early in the morning.
Yeah, right. Milking
school.
And then get it bottled and come into town and have to
A lot of
deliver
kids
milk.
nowadays aren't used to that type of thing.
No.
They just catch the school bus and go to school.
No, that's right. Yeah, we all had to do the delivering. But I remember how, oh my gosh, there was a house owned by Dr. Horn and his wife right across from the schoolhouse.
Right.
And he had this mean dog, really mean dog. I don't know what breed it was, but
The Yulen
after
dentist.
I've seen these, what are those kind of bulldogs nowadays? Mean ones, those really mean ones. Well, that's what he looked like, so he must have been one of those. But anyway, he was supposed to wear a muzzle. Doc Horn promised he would have a muzzle on that dog. And so this confirmation day, I'll never forget it. It was my confirmation day. I had this brand new, beautiful lavender, oh my gosh, it was pretty, lavender dress, lavender slip, and everything, and lots of ruffles. And so I'm delivering milk, and here this mean dog comes charging out at me, no muzzle, and bit me in the butt, and tore my dress and tore my slip. And of course I was crying and screaming and hollering. And,
How old were you then about?
oh, it was confirmation time. So I was probably,
okay.
what, like 12 or something like that?
Sure.
About 12 years old, I suppose. And no, isn't that about the age, confirmation
It's
age?
somewhere in there, maybe a little
It's
bit
been
older.
a long time ago,
Yeah,
but
right.
anyway, it was something like that.
Sure.
So that was a horrible situation. And so then a couple of days later, there was a man by the name of Martin Buckham that lived over there, and he was the father to Henry Buckham, who had the store at that time.
Sure.
And he had this cute little English bulldog, little black and white bulldog. Well, because we put the milk on the porch, then we always take the empty bottle away. And so I guess he thought I was stealing something, I don't know what. But Frenchie was driving the delivery truck, and I was up there with this, putting this milk bottle down. Here comes this little black and white bulldog out. Gonna hurt you, he's not gonna hurt you. But I was just so scared of dogs, and from then on, I just don't trust. Don't trust dogs.
Sure.
That was an awful incident. But we all helped. Everybody delivered the milk, and then when we come home from school, Bernice, my younger sister, 14 months younger, she and I had the job of right out to the milk house, change your clothes, go out to the milk house, and scrub all those bottles. And you'd be surprised how many people didn't wash the bottles, and that milk would sit in there and sour at the bottom. I hated that job. Anyway, we'd have to wash the bottles and sterilize them. And Dad built a rack where we could put them in and hang them upside down to dry. And so they'd be there for us the next day. But anyway, it was a big job. It was a lot of work, but at that time we were charging like 7 cents a bottle, a quart.
Sure.
And when we, by the time, I think it was, I don't remember what year, but we had to raise it a penny to 8, and boy, did the people complain.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, because we were renting that place, and then we were doing a little better, so Dad decided it was time to buy a place. So 2 miles south and half a mile east, there was a place right along that dry lake bottom that was called Polson Lake, and it had dried up, of course, during the drought, so there was no water in it. But we bought that place. Wheeler was living there at the time. Earl Wheeler was living there. So we bought that place. It's kind of interesting because we bought the house, and when we did then, that put us into Gooseberry Township. So we could not come back to Ullman School. We'd gone to Ullman School all those years, public school here in town.
Sure.
But when we moved then, of course, when we bought the house,
you had to
and
go
we
to
had
a country school.
immediately go to country school. And that was out there, township. It was 28, District 28 by the lake. But we hadn't moved yet because the fellow on the property, the house, wouldn't move. He was renting and he wouldn't get off.
Oh, I see.
And so anyway, the sheriff had to go out there and he threatened my dad with a gun.
Huh.
And so finally he left. But in the meantime, it was about 3 months we had to wait. And so we walked from over 1 mile south all the way over to the schoolhouse. They wouldn't let us come to Ullman because we had bought this property. So we walked in for about 3 months, and then he got off the place. And
They just didn't have open enrollment back then.
No such thing. No such thing. We weren't real happy about going to the country school because our friends were all in Ullman, you know.
Sure.
But it was nice. Merle Sherman taught, and she was a great teacher, very strict, but she was a good teacher. And there were 3 of us, then Leonard and myself and Bernice were going there. And so we had some fun. We went 3 years there. There was about a total of 15 kids, I think, is all we ever had. And so then we were there until I graduated from 8th grade. I'll never forget that 8th grade examination because in those days the county superintendent would come out and give you this test, and it was rough.
I see.
I don't think I could pass it today. I'm sure, and I don't think most of the kids couldn't pass it today either. So, but anyway, that was done.
So you finished the 8th grade out there, and then you could come to Ullman.
Then I could come back to Ullman again because it was high school then.
Sure.
So I came back to town then. So.
Did they have school buses, or did you have
No, not at first.
Getting in?
Not at first. No, Dad took us in whatever, if it was wintertime, he had a little cutter that he'd made to deliver milk and bring us to school. And he also was paid to bring some of the neighbor kids, too, from the district, I guess, paid or something. And so we did that, and then, let's see. Yeah, and then when I was about a junior, the buses started running, but only on the highway. We had to walk from the highway to our place, which was a half a mile away. And I remember during the wintertime, one time, Bernice and I had to walk home then from the highway, and of course, the girls didn't wear long pants in those days. You know, we all wore a dress that it was clear up to our knees, and we just sat in the snowbank kind of and sat there and giggled. Excuse me. And the boys were coming out to milk about that time, and they saw us, so they came and got us and brought us in. And I remember Dad rubbed kerosene on our legs. I can't imagine why.
Wow. Kerosene
on them, but oh boy, you know how you get chilblains when you are cold and then you get hot, you know. Boy, there was more than chilblains. It was terrible. We had bumps in our legs.
What was the reason for kerosene?
I have no idea.
Was that to make you feel warmer or something?
I don't know what the heck it was.
Trap the heat in?
Kerosene on.
I don't know.
Boy, funny. I can't imagine doing that today.
No.
But anyway, for the longest time, we actually had kind of lumps on our skin, on our legs for a long time. That was a rough thing. Okay, and about that time, then they formed a 4-H club, and they were called Gooseberry Goslings because we were in Gooseberry Township, and so we called ourselves Gooseberry Goslings. And Merle Sherman was one of the leaders for that, and I ended up with a Guernsey calf, of course, because of that. And Frenchy also had a Guernsey calf, and he went all the way to the state, down to St. Paul. They had to ship his calf down there and everything. He was ended up in one of the finalists. So we did that. And then one thing I decided to put in this book, which I thought might be of some help to the siblings, I ended up with a picture of each of the 8 kids, a wedding picture of each of the 8 kids. And then also, following that, a picture of their children, of the 8 siblings, with the dates they were born. So I thought that would be something they could refer back to, you know, each time.
Right.
And so a little bit of history there. And then back in 1936 was probably the worst winter and the worst summer. The hottest summer in history and the worst winter.
I missed out on that. I was born in 37.
Yeah. Oh, man, that was something else. I remember we couldn't sleep, you know, no air conditioning, no fans.
Yeah.
We couldn't sleep, and there were many nights that we ended up laying out on the lawn because it was a little cooler outside than in the house. And then, of course, we had to have smudges. You know, they burn green something. I don't know what they burned to make it smoke, but it was not a flame. It was smoke, you know, smudge, you called it. Did the same thing for the cattle, too, because the mosquitoes are so terrible. And so we did that and slept out there at night. And then in the wintertime, it was absolutely the worst winter ever. We had a snowbank so high that we had a 2-story house plus an attic, and we could walk from the snowbank and sit up on the roof of the house. It was just really something else, just a lot of snow. And then I'll never forget one winter. It was one of those terrible, terrible storms. I don't remember what time, but it was an awful storm. And, you know, those days we didn't have the insulated windows, the double-pane windows.
No.
And so, of course, your window was all covered with Jack Frost's painting. You know, it was beautiful, the patterns that Jack Frost could put on the windows. And then in order to be able to see out, you had to make a little hole in that frost to be able to look out. Well, the best way to do that was either put your tongue on it or something.
Put your hand on it.
Yeah, or put your tongue in a little spot, you know, and it would melt around. You could look out.
Right.
Well, my sister beneath the window, and she said, there's something moving out there in the snowbank. And so Dad went out there, and sure enough, there was a pheasant. And in those days, oh my goodness, we had more pheasants than we did chickens. They were just crowing all the time. They were just beautiful. And that was probably, it's in the 30s anyway. And so he went out, my dad went out, and here was this poor pheasant, and he was frozen in the snowbank. And he was just covered. It was one of those where you have the hoarfrost thing, you know, where it was damp out and everything was white.
Sure.
All the trees were just pure white, and he was just covered with ice. So Dad brought him in, and he was scared to death, of course. Brought him in, and the poor thing was so completely covered with ice, just a sheet of ice on him. And he was blinking his eyelids underneath the frost, underneath the ice. And we discovered that he had a broken leg. One leg was just dangling, and that's why he ended up in the snowbank. So my dad, master of trades, my mom always used to say, is there anything Oscar Freed can't do, she'd say. But anyway, so he cut the leg off and saved the skin part. And he took a piece of wood, carved a piece of a little branch, and made a wooden leg for him, and put it back on, and then tied it on with string or something. I don't remember. But anyway, the thing lived, and we put him in the chicken coop, but we didn't want him loose with the chickens, so we had one of those turkey crates that had the mesh wire. We put him in there, and he spent the winter in that, happy as a lark. And when we'd go in there to feed the chickens and so forth, why, he was just sitting there just as happy as the chickens. And so in the spring, we let him go. And so we often thought about it afterwards, you know, that the boys, I think it was in the fall when they were shocking corn, all of a sudden up flew that pheasant with the wooden leg, flew up into the air. So he was still living, and he took off into the air. And so we often thought about it. I wonder if a hunter shot that one that fall. And what on earth would he think when he found his peg leg on that pheasant? So that was an interesting incident.
Sure.
And then confirmation day, and of course after confirmation, then it could go to dances.
Oh, I see.
And of course we danced from the time we were little. I don't remember when. I cannot remember when I first learned to dance. But I know our dad, we used to have house parties all over. And my dad used to put us on his toes, and we'd dance around. Dance around. He used to call square dances. And,
he did.
And and he played the guitar, banjo guitar. And then there was always a neighbor that played a violin, so they'd play for the house parties. And, and then we'd dance. And Bill, then later too, older brother, started calling square dances too.
And I know you still love dancing.
Oh, I love dancing. Yes. I could dance 7 nights a week, which we did when we were younger. We used to dance like 7 nights a week. but I loved it. But,
what are the different dances? I know you can do hula. You can even teach hula dancing.
Yes, I do. Well,
but
polka
what are some of the polkas?
well, polkas, waltzes, schottisch, we learned all of those way, way, way back. I don't even remember when.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, later years, then I did, when you mentioned hula, we lived in Hawaii, and
Right.
I got a diploma to teach that.
Sure.
And it wasn't the hoochie-coochie type or
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was the old, really old, beautiful
Right.
Hawaiian where you tell the story with your hands, and then you do the steps with your feet.
Sure,
It's beautiful,
sure.
just beautiful. So I did teach that at several places after we left Hawaii. But we used to have some lovely house parties, barn dances. Used to have barn dances and so forth. So yes, and now we're of course able to go back to Ulen again, to Ulen School, and it was just called Ulen Public School then. It wasn't called elementary or high school or anything, just Ulen School. And about my junior year, I guess, I not met, but sat right next to Don in school alphabetically. We were sitting alphabetically, and Forsyth and Freed came together. So I would sit next to him. Anyway, I started dating Don in the junior year, and we dated all through junior and senior, and we had our graduation, of course. And so for one incident that happened in high school, it's kind of unusual. We had 37, they built the big new gym. And oh, did we think that was something. We thought we really had it. And it had a beautiful floor, so we thought, well, gee whiz, we should have school dances with that gorgeous hardwood floor. And so Don, of course, the Forsyths had the garage, and up above the garage was the dance hall, which was the original opera house in Ulen. And it had a stage and everything just ready for dances and a band. And so Don and Basil used to hold dances up there. Oh. And of course that was a no-no back in those days between church and school. Either one, the pastor or the school, they did not like those dances.
Sure.
And so I think they kind of held a grudge against the Forsyths. In fact, I know they did. And so anyway, then in 37, when we decided that we should have school dances, Don started a petition that went around to the kids to see if we shouldn't have school dances. He signed it first, and I signed it second, and we took it around. We probably had about 40 signatures on it. Uh-huh. Man alive. All of a sudden, Superintendent Langamo got together with Pastor Tanner, and right now, that put a stop to those dances, or to even thinking about it. And Don ended up being expelled from school.
Oh, no.
And I had to take my lessons, my Latin, in Langamo's office for a week.
Is that right?
Yep. Don had to go to Densmore, who was on the school board, to get permission to get back to school again.
There were consequences.
Yeah, so we didn't get our school dances. But years later, Eldora Lundy...
I'm sorry, my battery ran out, so I put another battery in. You were going to say, after years later, Eldora Lundy, something?
Yes, uh-huh.
What were you going to say?
Okay, well, we didn't get our school dances, of course. But years later, I'm going to jump ahead, then I'll go back again. But years later, when we had the centennial, by then Don had started the centennial band, and so we held a dance at the schoolhouse. We held a dance, and we had hired a big band. It was called the American Band, Big American Band, or something like that. A 15-piece Glenn Miller style band. It was from Fargo, and they came in the tuxes and everything, and we hired them. The Centennial Band hired them to play for a dance at the gym, and we called it the Senior Prom. And so about that time, then Eldora Lundy wrote an article in the paper saying that Don and Mae finally get their senior prom. And it was that particular dance then. And it was a beautiful dance. And we had that, and then we also had a tour of our house. We were living in the dollhouse at the time. We had a tour of that to pay for the band. So. But anyway, we'll go back to school again, back to high school again. And so then when it came time to graduate, to show you that the superintendent had a grudge against the Forsyths, when we graduated, all the graduates were up on the stage, and he called out the names, of course, in alphabetical order.
I see.
And when it came to Forsyth, he skipped them. He skipped on.
Is that right?
Went on to me, and went through the whole bunch and let Don stand there and worry whether he was getting a diploma or not. Finally, when he was done with everybody else, he finally gave Don his diploma.
Is that right?
So you knew very well.
Yes.
That's the kind of person he was. He was not
Langamo, huh?
He was not our favorite person. He could not look you in the eye and talk to you.
I kind of remember him. He was here before Tielemson.
He was here a long time.
Sure.
He was here a long time. Yeah. No, he was not our favorite person at all. No, but anyway, that's what happened. Through high school, then we graduated together. Then in 1940, and so that was the end of the high school.
You were married in 43, weren't you?
Married in 43. Yes, he went into the Navy right out of high school. We graduated in June, I suppose, the first part of June, and he went in, I think, in July. He went in the Navy in July, and so that was.
Well, I think what we'll do, we're going to stop right now, and we'll pick this up, and we'll start talking about Don and his career.
Okay.
And more yet.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Good. Don